Pompeo delivers an amazing speech that should have the whole country talking, and the media totally ignores it. That's why we have the Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, Chuck Holton here. Thanks for watching the Hot Zone. Mike Pompeo is one of the most outspoken Christians in our government today. The U.S. Secretary of State goes all over the world, and he is not afraid to share his faith. Now, he gave an unbelievable speech at Prestonwood Baptist Church in Plano, Texas the other day about the greatness of America, what it is that makes America great, about why we need to keep faith in the public square. That's not something just for your homes and your hearths and your hearts. It is something to be shared. And why we had these historic Abraham Accords between Israel and several Muslim nations in the last few weeks. I want you to listen to this entire speech end to end. And remember a couple of things while you're listening. Number one, the media wouldn't let you hear this speech. That's why you need to listen to the Hot Zone. Number two, Mike Pompeo makes an unbelievably good point about why it's important to be sharing our faith in the public square. And I want you to think about this. Under Barack Obama, would Mike Pompeo have been allowed to share his faith? Absolutely not. He would have been muzzled in the public square. Barack Obama famously in his administration said that our faith should stay in our hearts and in our homes and not be in the public square. But that's not what faith was made for. Check this out.
Good morning, everyone. What a glorious welcome. I think I'm going to take that choir with me wherever I go. Good things would surely follow. Pastor Graham, thank you for having me here today. It's been delightful to get to meet you. First Lady, nice to see you. My wife Susan and I, for these past months, much like many of you haven't been able to go to church, we've been streaming our home church, Eastminster Presbyterian, up in Wichita, Kansas, just a couple hours up I-35 from here. It's not the same thing as gathering with our fellow believers. Those people at Eastminster are near and dear to our hearts. They're our friends, the people we love to worship with. I was a deacon there. That was my first entry into politics. And then I taught fifth grade Sunday school. Susan and I taught a class together there for a number of years. I would try and teach the boys scripture, which has been perfect to become Secretary of State. Fifth graders and tyrants around the world share certain common characteristics. Having once had a fifth grade boy myself, I was ready. Look, I put an enormous smile on my face to come in here today, to see the parking lot full of big trucks and to see the pews filled with Christian believers, followers of Jesus. This is the America that I know and the America that I love. It's great to be with you all here today. Just a little over 3 years ago, I was the director of the CIA. I was traveling to a pretty difficult, dark place in the world. I was climbed off the airplane. It was in the middle of the night. Came down the steps, and an older gentleman reached out his hand to me, and we shook hands. And into my hand, he placed a small palm-sized Bible, kind of tattered. I grabbed it. I didn't know exactly what it was. I thanked him, said hello, and hopped on into my vehicle. Got in the car and opened it up, and there was a note from him inside the Bible. It said, Mr. Director, you have been a light to me and to the world. Bless you. I later learned that he was a State Department employee. I had no idea that someday I would lead his team. But I did know that for at least one person at that moment in time, I had been a beacon. I had been a light. I had shone for him. I tell you this story because this is what I want to talk about today. It's not because of something that I did. I tell you that story because it tells each of us about how we have a responsibility to model Christian behavior and to be a light unto the world. You know, I'm now America's most senior diplomat. I travel the world. I meet with people of many, many faiths. How America leads in the world is being watched, and there is an absolute responsibility to make sure that they understand our founding as a Judeo-Christian nation. And I believe deeply, with all my heart, that faith in the public square, for each of us, faith in the public square is not only lawful, but righteous. That faith is not only powerful, but required by the American tradition. And especially in these challenging times, keeping faith in the public square is not simply acceptable, but it's an imperative. Our president believes that, and the senior leaders of America believe that, and we every day strive to help all of us who have a responsibility to keep faith in the public square, whether that's at home or at work or on the soccer fields with our kids or at a PTA meeting, wherever we may find ourselves. This is essential. It's an essential part of the American tradition. You know, I know I'm in Texas. I know some of you think it's a country. I know it's not. My team reminded me that, sir, you're headed to Guyana, Suriname, Brazil, Colombia, and then you're going to Texas. And the original press release said 5 countries, 5 days. It is an enormous privilege to serve as Secretary of State, and a blessing that none of us should forget, that the good Lord has bestowed upon us, and that our founders enshrined in our documents, our core documents, for us and preserved for us. This right that comes not from governments, the fact that we are human beings, our founders recognized that, and these men, these amazing men, back 240 plus years ago, enshrined it in our core documents that faith would in fact be in the public square. We need to live up to that each and every day. They knew, they came from different faith walks themselves, but they knew that each of us had human dignity because we were created in the image of God. That certainly accounts for us in America, but accounts for all people. It was George Washington who wrote, of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. Think about that. They were fighting a revolution, they were working to build out a nation, and they turned to those central ideas upon which to build it. They put protection of human dignity and human freedom at the heart of our founding documents. They knew that religious freedom, the capacity to worship in the way that you wanted, was central to the well-being of a nation. And to this day, while imperfect, America reflects this. Our State Department, the work that we do all across the world, must reflect this as well. I'll give you a good example from just this week. I was in the northern part of Brazil, near the Venezuelan border, and the refugees were fleeing from the brutal Maduro regime. And you saw Americans there, some of them working for the government, but many there volunteering. There was mission work taking place as well, providing humanitarian assistance, help, and a thoughtful prayer for those people who were in such difficult conditions. We know America is at its best when faith is in the public square. We defend human rights inside of our borders and outside of our borders like no other nation in the history of civilization. Now, we're not perfect. We get it wrong sometimes. Indeed, in America, some of our greatest failings have been when we didn't acknowledge the place that faith must play in our lives. In America, we have a very broad understanding. If you have no faith and that is your choice, we rightly don't permit a national government to establish a state religion. But everyone in this room knows what nations look like when religious freedom is stomped out and faith in the public square is eliminated. There's examples that are ongoing today. We see what's happening in places like Cuba. Pastor Graham spoke about the fact that I served as a young soldier on the West German, East German border. I sat in my tank and I could see the sullen faces of the East German people who lived in a communist police state. We know the horrors of Adolf Hitler and his godless regime. Today, sadly, millions and millions of people still live under regimes that want to banish faith from the public square or any notion of God from basic civic life. Today, perhaps the most egregious example is the Chinese Communist Party. Today, in a western part of China, a place that none of us might know, a place called Xinjiang, more than 1 million Chinese have been forced into internment camps, being surveilled 24/7, forced sterilizations, forced abortions. Today, in the world in which we habit, they're subjected to torture and worse. It's part of the Chinese Communist Party constant attack on faith. It's a war on faith that's been happening for decades. The United States, for the first time in many years, is taking this on under President Trump in a serious way. Earlier this summer, I read a pleading message from a Chinese woman whose husband is a pastor imprisoned in China. She wrote to me, quote, "Beloved brothers and sisters, I earnestly ask for your prayers for me and for my family. It's been over 6 months since my husband has been incarcerated. At first he would make phone calls. I'd hear from him from prison. He would let me know that he is okay. Now the remaining hope that I have is painfully small, and I hope every day is to receive a 3-minute phone call. All I have left is prayer." We should be mindful of our responsibility, our duty, our obligation, and our capacity to keep our faith, our light, in the public square. As Christians, we're called to do that. We have that responsibility. It's fundamentally American, too. We should pray. That's the first of all things. I feel prayers. I get notes from people who say they're praying for me. I can feel it. My wife, my son, we all appreciate it. Of course, too, you should keep supporting the missionaries that come from your church and from others. They're doing remarkable work. I see it as I travel all around the world. They are bringing salt and light to some of the darkest corners of the world. But you can also do it in simple ways. In every interaction that you have, whether you're at church or at a Bible study, at your work, or wherever you may find yourself, exercise your right to religious freedom. Be open. Be clear about who you are. Imagine millions of Americans of faith, all faiths, exercising these freedoms every day. The cumulative effect is massive, and it would empower me as the Secretary of State of the United States of America. You will be telling the world who we are as a nation. And two, you'll give nations that are torn apart by religious conflict hope that people of different faiths can live in unity. This is something we do here that is uniquely American. We can pass that on all around the world. If you hide your light in an open society like ours, that sends a terrible message to places that are more difficult, who have trouble or who are threatened if they choose to be bold in their faith. I'd urge every one of you to use your precious freedoms to do big things for our country alongside of doing big things for our kingdom. Now, the world is watching us, and there will be naysayers, there'll be critics. If you speak up about your faith, it is undoubtedly the case that someone will suggest that that's not the right thing to do. But don't be discouraged. It means you've got conviction and that you showed it. I know this firsthand. I'm not a victim, but I've seen it. A previous national security advisor said that it was problematic that Mike Pompeo is overtly religious. The New York Times wrote a piece that my wife still gives me trouble about. It says, quote, "No Secretary of State in recent decades has been as open and fervent as Mr. Pompeo about discussing Christianity and foreign policy in the same breath." My son, Nick, who's almost 30 now, his primary function in life is to keep me humble. He read that and texted me. He says, "Well, how many breaths are you supposed to take between the two?" A reasonable question from a wonderful young Christian believer. Look, connecting faith to America's foreign policy is an imperative. It's important. It's a good thing. I was reminded of that just this past week. On Tuesday, I was at the White House for a ceremony. The leaders of 2 Muslim nations made peace with the Jewish state of Israel. Many things that we did enabled that. The president made the decision to recognize this biblical land and Jerusalem as the rightful capital of that nation. But in the end, those leaders, both in public and in private, made very clear that they were adamant that their faith was at the center of this accomplishment, what it is we were collectively able to achieve. Even though these nations had and likely will have disagreements on many things for time to come, I'm confident that their faith was what drove them to be able to get to the right place to make this good decisions for both of their peoples. It is no coincidence that the historic agreements between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Israel and Bahrain are known as the Abraham Accords. Now, I know that God's name can be invoked for evil, but we should welcome it when leaders across the world feel bound by a higher power to pursue harmony with other nations. It's a glorious thing. It's a deeply Christian thing. Faith strengthens American diplomacy. It doesn't diminish it. More good news. I'm not the only one at the State Department that believes this. Recently, a group of light shiners who work at the State Department started the first ever faith-based employee affinity group at the State Department. One of the faith group's leaders came to me and she said, "Mike, before you arrived, we did not think it wise to gather around our belief in Jesus. Now, because of you, we know we must show the value added by people of all faiths to the State Department mission." What a glorious thing. The right heart. So don't let anybody tell you that faith is disconnected from who we are as Americans. As I travel the globe from Israel to India, from South Korea to Senegal, world leaders always talk to me about their faith. And they tell their people about their faiths too. It's at the center of lives all across the world. Indeed, it is in the places where faith is suppressed or targeted for total erasure that we see brutality and evil, and where humanity is most oppressed. We have a special responsibility to keep faith in the public square here in the United States of America. Look, I have this great blessing. I get to carry out this mission, this privilege to serve as America's 70th Secretary of State. It's only because of God's grace in my life that I have had this chance. I keep on a table over on the right-hand side of my office a Bible. I try to dig into the Word each and every day. It's a little harder as I get busier. There's an elevator I ride every day into work. It's about 20 seconds. I use that to bow my head and set myself for the day to pray when I'm in Washington. It's consistent with what the Bible tells us in Galatians chapter 6, verse 9. It reads, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." Look, I know these times are difficult. We're getting our churches and our schools back open. This is fantastic. We will do this good work alongside the Lord. We have great help. It is His power that has made perfect in weakness. So here at Prestonwood, my friends, and everywhere else, don't ever give up shining the light. Don't ever walk away from an opportunity to put faith in the public square. Do walk with the Lord. And keep at it. Stay true. Keep believing. All of us together will make this nation a light unto the world. Thank you for letting me be here today. May God bless each and every one of you.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.